Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is the 29th day of November 2020. And my talk today is dealing with the Council of Orange in 529. Some would also call it the Second Council of Orange. And what was taking place here, this give you some background. Where you need to be understanding that both Pelagius and Augustine are now they passed. They're no longer living. And there's a group of moderates that are trying to be what I call semi-Pelagius, which is having some growth taking place in the Roman Empire, and they want to continue to keep that in place. And so they seek to go to the Council in Orange and to explain their ideas and to be a little bit more pressure put upon the Augustinian view. And so let me give you another history lesson here, is that Pelagius' theology and his perspective was actually condemned at the non-academic deal, the Carthage, Council of Carthage in 418, but eventually it was condemned and ratified at the Council of Ephesus at 431. Now, let's explain something basic here. Some people may not understand what I'm talking about, these councils. These are church councils. These are councils that are meeting to deal with what we call doctrines of the church. And at this time, it's all to do with the Roman Catholic Church. There's really not any other church out there. There are other splinter groups that are actually the Donatists that are out there, but eventually they get condemned and actually are pretty much destroyed by the Catholic Church. Not in a what we call theological issues, but destroyed physically. So these councils meet to set doctrines of the church. So you have to understand that when these councils meet, these are bishops. And what I understand simply is there were 14 bishops that met in this particular council. So they wanted those that were seeking this were wanting a more moderate perspective of Pelagianism, and they didn't want to go to the extreme of others that have been in the part of the Pelagian movement, and also wanted to quell the Augustinian view also. And that's what they pretty much got. So what transpired simply was that some of the things that took place was simply is that they were looking to eliminate the double predestination, and they got that. So what it means that the Calvinists later on will continue to reaffirm the double predestination, that God chooses the elect, and he also chooses those who are not elect. And at this particular council, they felt simply is that God was not a part of the evil perspective. So he said they were saying simply is that, look, God is not evil here, and we're not going to support the double predestination perspective that that man is condemned by God. That's not part of God's who he is. And so the Augustinians, not Augustinians, but the Pelagians, semi-Pelagians, felt as though they got a victory, and they did. And so later on, this particular council had interpretations of Augustine. Later medieval Western churches would have an effect upon Thomas Aquinas later on in his classical perspective of it, affirming the theology of the Second Council of Orange, and had appealed to make a case that the Lutherans and Calvinist doctrines of solo grace, solo faith, and solo Christ, and original sin, as total depravity, had already been taught much earlier than the 16th century Protestant Reformation. So what it took place simply is that later on, the Protestants, the Reformers, balked at this particular council and would not agree with this. But we know that. But this was a council that met and was trying to basically iron out some things to simply smooth things over. And they felt simply is that the viewpoint of Augustine was too strong, and saying simply is that God chooses those who are his and those who are not his. So this leads on to what we call eventually the Arminianist perspective later on, which is maybe another 1,000 years it takes later on. So this took place in 529. So we're talking about another 1,000 years that we see that the Renaissance has the effect upon the flowering of the knowledge that takes place in Europe, and with that leads to what we would call the Reformation of the churches. The problem with, again, like I've said, with the Reformation, the word is simply a misnomer. It's not a reform. It's just simply changing some things and actually going back. You see, Calvin was a very astute, and also Luther. They went back to the teachings of Augustine. And I emphasize this over and over again with people when I share this. They don't go back to the patristic period. Because, see, patristic period is not what I call doctrinal expounded. And I explained this in my video yesterday. It simply is the early church was not the Roman Catholic Church. It was a group of churches that met in each large city and had bishops. And each bishop actually set the tone of what they taught. So there was no united front at that point. There was no doctrines that was so absolute that eventually take place later on, especially with Augustine and others. The main thing that the early church was dealing with was defending the faith and what they believed. So they were involved in other issues. They were defending what we call the Trinity. They would also defend what we call that, Jesus is God and man. So he's both essence of both. Which sets up a major problem because Jesus is not God. He's just an example of what we can do. And that's where this all sets up. This is this whole Savior mentality leads on to what we call today. It destroys man's responsibility to be right, to find truth. And what's happened simply is it's gotten so bad now that it's just lazy theology. That's what it is. And so what's transpired simply is that people just believe. Which is part of the Pisces age. That's what it's all about. It's just a belief. And this is dangerous. And again, like I said here, is that it's critical that you understand it simply is that's what it's led to, you see. And that was what Pelagius was adhering to. He saw that as a threat. Even 1800 years ago, approximately, not 1700 years approximately, 1600 to 1700 years ago. He saw this as a threat. He knew that simply as man was supposed to be responsible. And that was what Augustine, with his doctrines, eliminated. It destroyed man's responsibility in doing what is right. And going back to the patristic period simply is that, yes, they were already what we would call the apologetics, meaning basically meaning defending the faith. And that was what they were involved in. and arguing against those who were trying to say that there was no Trinity, that Jesus was simply a man, which is part of the Arius doctrines that Arius taught. Most of you don't know this. There were all kinds of things going on in the patristic period. And yet there was not a united front. There was just nothing to, there was no Catholic Church. There was no Roman Catholic Church. That was decreed by Constantine in early 300s, 315. And so people are not aware of these things, and so they don't understand these things. And the pastors don't study any church history, so they don't know a damn thing what they're talking about, which they don't. They just believe it because they were taught this early. They grew up in these churches, so they accept it. And it's a nice, cushy job, too. Being a pastor is a nice, cushy job. Let's be frank, folks. Most pastors today are actually not preachers. Some are, but not most of them are. They're not expounding the truth. They're expounding tradition. They're managers. They're managers of churches. That's what they are. They're managing a church. They're managing a flock of people who agree or disagree. That's why you have so many churches that split. Many start following the pastor and not looking at Scripture. But then their eyes are already cloudy anyway. They don't see the truth themselves. You see, the best thing you can do if you're in these churches is to get out of them. That's the best thing you can do. Because they're not teaching the truth. They're teaching a fatalistic perspective of man. They're teaching traditions. And these traditions are, a lot of them are over almost, approximately 1900 years, 1800 years been around. And most of the denominations that are here now in churches are what I call, because of certain leaders here in America, Roger Williams was the one part of the Baptist movement that took place when they moved to Rhode Island. The Puritans themselves became just like what they ran away from in England 150 years ago, 150 years before and they started becoming rulers and arbiters of truth. You see, and Roger Williams had to escape for his life, and he's part of the Baptist movement that took place here in America. And so it's critical when I explain these things to you. I'm out of this stuff. I'm not involved in it. But I think it's my responsibility as someone who's gone through this is to tell people, you need to consider this because this is just a belief. It's not a truth. And you're putting all your energy and belief in some man who went to seminary. And he's just simply doling out what he grew up. Why we have so many seminaries? Okay, because they all have different belief systems. You see, they're all essentially the same, but there are different minority differences between those churches. You see, so in reality, the essence is simply is they're all the same group. And I've always explained this that Protestants are a branch of the Roman Catholic Church. Essentially, they teach the same thing. That's what I mean by Reform. Reform simply does not deal with the foundation. They accept the foundation. They accept the foundation with Augustine. They accept almost all of them teach that. And so that's how, there's no change. And if anything simply is clearly is that we're all temples of God. God resides in us. You see, it's not a church. It's not a building. God doesn't come there. You see, people think that's what goes on, but that's not true. It's a belief system. And that's why the younger generation most of them have forfeit this. They don't want anything to do with this. They see it for what it is. It's a candy show. It's a fear show. You do what's right, such and such, you stay in the church, and God blesses you, and you're going to heaven. That's what they're teaching. If you don't, you're going to hell. You're a reprobate, you see. And it's damning because it actually damns people. It damns their spiritual walk. And it causes them pain and suffering, you see. Eventually what happens simply is many will simply just reject it all and quit. They won't seek anything. They will seek what's in the material world. That's what they'll see. That's the only thing they see. They don't see the spiritual world. That's what many do. There are others that basically don't reject that, and they go on and seek other answers, part of their pilgrimages. That is, they're seeking the truth. So, anyway, my throat's still giving me problems here, so I'm going to break off here. I hope that what I've explained to you makes sense to you. You need to check these things out. You really do. Seek the truth. That's what you need to be seeking, not what some preacher preaches. You see, they're just doing it because it simply is a way that they learn themselves that they actually, well, they're just hypocrites. Let's just call it that. They're hypocrites. They don't live this stuff. I've been around pastors. I've seen them. I've watched their actions. They're not broken-hearted people. Most are bought into the system, doctrines, and are arrogant people. And that's their problem, not yours. Okay. Thank you for your attention. You have a good day. Peace out.